So, Mr. President, the Speaker should send the articles of impeachment to the Senate.
Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances.
Word that Iranian-backed Shiite militias in Iraq are not yet done. Housing U.S. forces in Iraq are likely not the end of Iran's retaliation for the U.S. killing of the country's top general. Brian Todd is working this part of the story for us. Brian, we're also hearing this from Iran itself.
You're hearing it tonight, Wolf, from at least 2 top commanders of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. They are vowing revenge. And the people who've tracked Iran and its terrorist proxies for decades say the pronouncements from President Trump, Mike Pence, and others that Iran is standing down are, at the very least, misleading. Tonight, a top commander in Iran's notorious Revolutionary Guards vowing Iran will exact, quote, harsher revenge on the United States following the missile attacks on American positions in Iraq. Another Iranian general saying Iran's covert war against America is nowhere near over.
This indeed was the beginning of the big operation, an action that, God willing, will continue.
America's top military commander has sounded the alarm himself, warning of further retribution for the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani.
I and those of us in uniform and those in theater fully expect Shia militia groups to conduct terrorist operations against U.S. forces and coalition forces in Iraq and perhaps even elsewhere.
From the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, similar warnings about the capabilities of Iran and its lethal proxy forces, like Hezbollah, the Lebanon-based organization designated a terrorist group by the U.S. and several other Western nations.
Hezbollah has operatives both in the United States and in Canada and South America as well. And they have the capability to do surveillance, and they have the capability to carry out attacks.
In a new bulletin, FBI and Homeland Security officials say there's no specific threat at the moment, but that operatives accused of working for Iran and Hezbollah have been arrested in recent years inside the U.S., conducting surveillance of military and law enforcement facilities, critical infrastructure, public landmarks, and Jewish centers. Hezbollah has been supported financially and logistically by Iran, and specifically by Qasem Soleimani, for decades. But analysts say the group also operates like a mafia family.
Hezbollah also has a much larger logistical, financial, criminal network around the world, including in the United States. The majority of their operatives here will be involved in credit card fraud, in mortgage fraud, in all kinds of different criminal schemes to raise funds.
And Hezbollah is adept at revenge attacks. After the killing of one of its top commanders, it was believed to have bombed Israel's embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992, killing nearly 30 people. An attack 2 years later at a Jewish community center in the same city killed 85 people. And U.S. officials accused Hezbollah of acting on behalf of Iran in the 1983 truck bombing of the U.S. Marine compound in Beirut, killing 241 American service members. Iran denied involvement, but terrorism experts say the attack benefited the regime in Tehran.
We, the United States, did not really respond to that other than just a withdrawal from Lebanon, so it was a huge success as far as Iran and Hezbollah was concerned. They got us out.
Analysts point out that Iran and its proxies are not invincible in carrying out plots against the U.S. Some of their recent operations on U.S. soil have either been foiled or simply failed, and the Joint Chiefs Chairman says with Qasem Soleimani no longer around, some of the training, the weapons, and other support for those proxies could be compromised. But experts believe those groups do still have enough capability and now certainly a strong motive to hit the U.S. somehow. Wolf?
And if some of Iran's proxies want to hit the United States on their own, Brian, it's not clear that Iran could actually rein them in.
That's right, Wolf. You know, one U.S. defense official tells CNN some of the commanders of Iranian-backed militias are really not very disciplined. In fact, a source tells us that Qasem Soleimani himself kept having to circulate among those proxy forces to keep them in line, maybe in some cases even keep them from attacking U.S. positions. So it's not clear if Soleimani's successor is going to be able to keep those proxy militias under control.
Brian Todd reporting for us. Thank you. Breaking news, next new video allegedly showing a Ukrainian airliner being struck by a missile. As a U.S. official tells CNN, it's believed Iran was responsible. And we're also watching the ongoing House vote on limiting President Trump's war powers.
representative's creature. I believe, passionately in the authorities that we have. But I think it is important to make clear, you can question whether or not this was a wise decision. The president had the authority to do what he did here. Whether you're talking about Article 2 or the War Powers Resolution, which talks about having 60 days before you need to go to Congress and get something. So I think it's important to be clear. He had the authority to do this. Whether it's smart, whether this will lead to a longer conflict, which would need some type of congressional authority.
But she should be held responsible for if he cherry-picked if he basically used a fictional...
There can be a debate of whether it was the right thing to do. And certainly I think he made a process foul by not looping in congressional leaders. That is...
You could have done a Gang of 8 thing here that would have been a lot more responsible.
And one of the reasons why you do that is for your own benefit. To share the blame or to share the responsibility. Yeah. I talked to you about this, you didn't raise any concerns, that kind of thing. There are reasons you do these that aren't just necessarily for the benefit of Congress. So there are process fouls along the way, but I think he had the authority, and I think if Congress ever really wanted to lay out what they thought a proper authorization was, they would do it. They're just incapable of it.
But Danielle, I'll go back to where I just said, we talk about the politics of how each party's defending it, but if your long-term goal is to try to get some the irony here is to go to this process foul, I like that phrase, Elliot Engel, Raul Menendez. There's quite a few Democrats who are hawkish on Iran, who might have been publicly supportive of a plan to get Soleimani. Had you looped them in? Had you brought them along? And that's, to me, I just think that's the political mistake among any. It's like, you could have had more buy-in for this. There are plenty of Democrats who are hawks on Iran. Iran is one of those that cuts across party lines in both parties.
Right. Well, that leads me to question then, what was the intelligence? What exactly led them to make this decision? Because you're 100% right. There are Democrats who might have supported an action like this if there was real intelligence supporting the need to do this right now.
And there are certainly frontline moderate Democratic freshmen in the House who would have been delighted to vocally support something like this had they had, any inkling that the administration had used a process that their leadership could get behind.
But going back to this, it's interesting on the ends justify the means, and the reason I wanted to frame it that way. I think ultimately, Brendan, that is, if there is some fundamental misunderstanding of us in Washington trying to figure out why people end up siding with Trump even if they don't like him, it's this ends justifying this a means mindset. It was really, I think, taken hold on the right side.
I think after all of these many years in the Middle East, the idea of taking out a bad guy with a missile, that was quick, that seemed seemingly easy. It's something that people can, that's how we should be fighting wars. It should not be sending hundreds of thousands of troops. So I think you can score some points that way. I don't think look at it that way.
But I almost mean it, Daniel, bigger than that. Like, this is how they justify all their support for Trump. Well, I don't like how he does it,
but he got results.
But I got my tax cut. Or you got whatever it is, that has really taken root.
I've always said, and you've talked about this a lot, the sort of like nothing matters politics, like whatever happens, everybody goes to their corner. I've always long thought that the one breaking point could be if Trump got us into a ground war that costs a lot of lives.
By the way, we're seeing that could have been the case, because you saw he doesn't have... He knows he has to back off, doesn't he?
And you even saw, some of his favorite personalities on Fox News, giving him some brushbacks on this. That is the one area where I don't think that he actually has the juice to get there.
I think that's why he so quickly took the offering, for what it's worth. Anyway, Betsy, Brendan, Daniela, thank you all for sort of a quirky, busy...
Hello, Greg.
Up in a Senate trial, the potential for testimony from former National Security Advisor John Bolton. The president sounded open to it, but with limitations.
I'd have to ask the lawyers, because we do have to me, for the future, we have to protect presidential privilege. When we start allowing national security advisors to just go up and say whatever they want to say, we can't do that.
On a different crisis, the threat posed by climate change, the president changed his tune. Mr. Trump claimed he no longer sees global warming as a hoax, a comment he made as his administration was rolling back environmental regulations.
What is your position on global warming? Do you think it's a hoax?
No, not at all. Nothing's a hoax. Nothing's a hoax about that. It's a very serious subject. I want clean air. I want clean water.
The White House and Senate Republicans, including the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, are continuing to coordinate as the president's impeachment trial draws closer. We should point out, as the president was departing the White House for a political rally in Ohio, he was meeting with his White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, also his outside attorney, Jay Sekulow. But Wolf, going back to the headline, I think that hangs over everything at this hour when it comes to this intelligence with respect to the president's call to take out Qasem Soleimani, a senior defense official, telling CNN, telling other reporters over at the Pentagon in the last hour that yes, that there was intelligence that the U.S. had that Soleimani was plotting to attack that U.S. embassy in Baghdad with explosives. That contradicts what White House officials, administration officials were telling CNN earlier in the day, that the president, when he made those remarks here at the White House earlier in the day, that he was referring to that storming of the embassy late last year, Wolf.
Yeah, let's not forget there are hundreds of American diplomats, military personnel, civilian contractors who work not just at the embassy, but in that green zone surrounding the embassy. So there are a lot of targets potentially for these guys. All right, Jim Acosta,
right.
Thank you very, very much. The House of Representatives now has just approved a rebuke of President Trump's military action against Iran, voting to limit his war powers. Let's go to our congressional correspondent, Phil Mattingly. He's up on Capitol Hill. So the House just voted. What's the latest?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Wolf. And you really need to view this resolution that they just voted on, just passed, as kind of a political messaging effort trying to reshape public policy. This isn't on its face necessarily going to restrict what President Trump can or can't do related to his own authority or efforts to strike against Iran if he believes that the opportunity presents itself. But what it does do is send a very clear message, a message that you've heard repeatedly from Democrats over the course of the last couple of days, especially in the wake of those classified briefings from administration officials yesterday, that they believe there wasn't necessarily sufficient justification for the strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, but perhaps more importantly, that the explanations have not been fulsome. Whether or not the attack was imminent has not been explained, and what the administration's next steps forward have also not been laid out in full, and kind of demonstrating the cross currents as it comes to national security and Iran specifically. Wolf, 8 Democrats voted against this resolution and 3 Republicans voted for it. One of those Republicans, one of the president's closest allies on Capitol Hill, Matt Gaetz, who gave a fiery speech on the House floor and also tweeted this, quote, "I represent more troops than any other member of this body. I buried one of them earlier today at Arlington. If our service members have the courage to fight and die in these wars, Congress ought to have the courage to vote for or against them. I'm voting for this resolution." And Wolf, this is a debate that obviously has been kind of percolating over the course of the last couple of years. The tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch over the expansive powers the executive branch has claimed the last couple of decades as it pertains to military action. And it's not just going to stop here. Obviously, this resolution will go over to the Senate, but the Senate, Senator Tim Kaine specifically, a Democrat from Virginia, is drafting his own resolution. Some Republicans have already come out yesterday. We talked about it yesterday. Senators Mike Lee and Rand Paul saying they will support that resolution as well. So clearly something happening on Capitol Hill won't necessarily directly affect the president's power, but sending a clear message to the administration when it comes to how they deal with Iran, Wolf.
Important point indeed. Meanwhile, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is signaling she may soon end her standoff with the Senate over those 2 articles of impeachment. What are you learning?
Yeah, Wolf, soon being the key phrase that no one is exactly sure what that means yet. Speculation really the coin of the realm here on Capitol Hill right now. There is an expectation here that the articles will be sent over by the end of this week, but the best rule of thumb I've heard up to this point is if you haven't heard from Speaker Pelosi when she's sending over the articles, you don't know. Just a lot of people wondering, assuming, thinking something's coming, but nothing is guaranteed until the Speaker announces it herself, Wolf.
Phil Mattingly up on Capitol Hill. Thank you, George.
Programming lineup changes to show what Family Feud and Jeopardy are doing. You can find those on the KSFY News app and KSFY.com. And Sam will be back in just a few minutes with a full look at our forecast. A little bit warmer today, but that might be changing. Temperatures going down a little bit.
Season 2.
Right here on MeTV, Sioux Falls 13.3. At Fairway, we're here to help you kick off the new year right with great savings.